morning, class. Today I am going to teach you the difference between theft and fraud. Theft is when someone has taken something from you and you are very sad because you know they have taken something from you. Fraud is when someone has secretly taken something from you and you're happy because you don't know that they've taken it from you, so it is a secret theft.
You know, I'm being beaten up at this game because everybody's got a different game and I don't know the rules. So there's no way I can win. And that's the problem with the investment industry. We don't know what the rules are.
Found that this guy did similar things with 7 of his clients. Okay. So the IDA says the guy is guilty, right, but we can't help him. And TD Waterhouse says, we don't care what the IDA says, we're not paying you back.
Instead of practice the trade in the investment industry, they had learned really well how to practice the tricks of the trade.
Being exposed to a sales game where you're being sold a product for a motive which might not be in your best interest as a consumer.
Because basically I feel the public is being deceived by the industry and the regulators are complicit with that, knowingly or unknowingly.
The financial health of Canadians is equal to the financial health, your physical health.
Yes.
I don't think there is a Canadian who would support the pharmaceutical industry being responsible for the approval of its own drugs.
That's what we have in the investment
industry. And that's
industry.
what we have in the investment industry.
And somebody ends up taking their own life and they're driven to it, that's bullying. I've used the term collective homicide on this. And that's what it is.
It certainly is a misrepresentation that they have criteria, because if there's no deployment of the criteria or written record, then there are no criteria as far as I'm concerned.
If the public knew what was going on in the securities industry, there would be no securities industry.
I came from farming country, where the family farm used to be a lifestyle for those lucky enough to live it. No longer. Today farming is not about open skies and clean air. It's about tractors that steer themselves using GPS and computers and genetically modified seeds. The same revolutionary change has taken place in Canada's financial services industry. In the early days of financial services, owners had their names on the door. They were answerable to the public they served based on their reputation and their standing in the community. It was a gentleman's club run by gentlemen. We're now in a world that's changing faster and faster, becoming more competitive every day, such that it's hard to keep up with the change. We are also seeing a shift from people to corporations as having the largest influence on our lives and our economies. Where we once had small businesses, mom and pop stores, we now have corporations. Where once men of finance owned the firm and kept their name on the door, we now have hired managers with pay packages tied to short-term performance, and then they're gone. In today's system, those gentlemen are also long gone. The firms have been bought up by one of the 5 banks in Canada, and 90% of the financial services in Canada are provided by one of these banks. An oligopoly bordering on monopoly exists with regard to the extent of power and control they exert over the marketplace. Ownership has been replaced by hired managers, temporary CEOs who turn over every 5 years or so. Each one tries to take home something like $50 million upon his departure. Instead of a lifetime career and a financial firm built as well as a reputation, it has become a game of how much can I make and how fast can I take it from the company. The problem with corporations running or owning or controlling everything is that although the corporation is recognized to have all the legal rights of an individual, they have no soul. They have no conscience, no morals, nor ethics. People can own and control them, hiding behind them, hurting other people, hurting the planet. It can cause people to die if a corporation is bad enough, and the owners and managers can become richer and richer while hiding behind the veil. The veil that says, "I did not do it, my corporation did." Lies become the order of the day. Deceit becomes the currency. Decline in society becomes inevitable. A provincial securities commission official told me, "Larry, if you go up against a Canadian bank, they will leave you emotionally and financially bankrupt." I laughed. They also said they will beat you without leaving any marks. I'm no longer laughing. In Canada, if you tell the truth on corporate wrongs or criminal behavior, you are far more likely to earn a place in jail, an institution, or to take your own life than the person in the corporation who committed those acts of wrongdoing. I was born to the farm, out west, where people do things quite differently. I guess that is why I do things differently. I guess I did not fit into a life of high finance. It's not to say I could not handle it. I managed to thrive after a decade or so. I just had a problem when client interest got stepped on. They told me that the client always came first, and then the industry showed me how to not do what they said. The industry just could not live up to its claims when conflicts occurred. There was too much money involved, and it caused people to forget right and wrong. Principles folded like a cheap tent in a Chinook wind. Out west, we used to live and work fairly close with our neighbors. In times past, we truly depended on them for survival, and they depended on us. That is the feeling that my parents' generation gave me. A lesson in how to treat others as if you would like to be treated yourself. It works in a society where you need your neighbors. This is my dad when he was still alive, doing what he loved to do, play with old farm machinery. I love to watch him finally get to enjoy the toys that he had to work so hard with all his life. Here is how he was taught to treat his neighbors. This is the example he gave to me. Here's how I find neighborly treatment among the top bosses I found myself working for when I joined the financial industry. Each time I visit Toronto, the money capital of Canada, I take a tour of these neighborhoods. I go to learn how the other side lives. I used to envy these people, and now that I understand the price they pay to get here, what they have to give up, I find myself being sorry for some of them. My views are different. My perspective is unable to handle where some of these folks are coming from. This is also Conrad Black's neighborhood. I often wonder what he had to do to live here. Unfortunately, these are the people who run the money in Canada. I wonder if money can be that addictive. Maybe some are just as sick as some of the homeless people at the opposite end of the economic food chain. I remember when I was a kid, I liked to take things apart and see how they worked. Anything I could open up, I would. As an adult, I started to dissect the motivations and to follow the money of the financial business to see how it truly worked. I found some really unhealthy people, sick people. The problem always used to be, according to my mom, that things did not always go back together exactly the same as before I took them apart. I wonder if the financial business might change if I take it apart and look at the insides. I wonder if my insides might change if I try to dissect the financial business. My first lesson in corporate misbehavior was when Bud Jorgensen of the Globe and Mail newspaper uncovered the practice of sending mutual fund salesmen on free trips for selling certain mutual funds. I thought the practice was an obvious conflict, and I saw it as a black eye on our business. I spoke in support of what the reporter was revealing, saying it was better to get it into the open than to hide it and be embarrassed by it later. Little did I know that my manager at the time was attending the Indy 500 each year for free, courtesy of plunking his clients into the Mackenzie Fund. Mackenzie sponsored an Indy car at that time, and for those top salesmen, the thrill on top of the free trip was being able to sit inside the race car as a bonus. I was told by him that anyone who speaks outside the firm about these free trips will be fired. It was my first lesson in a mafia-like code of silence to hide bad corporate behavior.
How do you stand with Lobo? Huh? Come on, how do you stand with Lobo? Who's Lobo? That's good. They win.
So which takes precedence, our customers or our profits?
That's a crazy question, eh, Johnny?
I've always published articles in my local paper to educate investment clients. My second lesson in the Code of Silence was when I mentioned how to buy mutual funds free of charge in one of these articles. After all, there were so many ways to be paid: commissions, trailing commissions, marketing incentives. We were all making a very good living now that the baby boomers had discovered investing. I thought that clients should not have to suffer just so that I was paid 2 or 3 different ways. I was in the minority, I guess. I was told by 4 or 5 managers at my firm, "You're making other salesmen angry, Larry. You can't publicly advertise commission-free mutual funds." I thought the code of ethics would rule over the code of silence, but I was wrong.
I am instructing you not to answer that question. In accordance to the terms of the contractual obligations undertaken by you, not to disclose any information about your work. That means you don't talk.
Despite being fully deregulated in 1987, I don't think to this day that you'll find any broker ads showing clients how to buy mutual funds free of commission. Discount broker ads maybe, but no ads from a trusted, full-service advisor. You would think that a trusted advisor would tell you these things, that you can freely negotiate your fund charges, that most sales can earn the broker 2 commissions. My third lesson, and the one that finally told me I had to leave this industry, was when a salesman bragged to me that he had $38 million in mutual funds that he intended to switch to house-branded funds. He and the firm would increase commissions or fees to the firm by about $750,000 if he were to do this. When these new house brand funds came along, the firm was able to keep 100% of the management fees in-house. He quickly learned that his annual income would go up by about 10 times if he moved all his clients' money there. He bragged to me about being able to move all these clients to the fee-based accounts and generate about $750,000. He did not concern himself with the interests of the clients, just that he could place them in a fund where the broker could now get himself into a better fee arrangement, about 10 times better for the broker. Even though the compliance department knew of the problem, sales managers with sales figures dancing in their heads won out over client protection. It was the final straw for me. It became clear that violating the code of silence and speaking up on behalf of clients just caused me to be labeled not a team player. The work environment got tougher and tougher after that. My personal dilemma was this: what if your company has a code of silence that says nothing can be spoken of outside the company without management approval, and yet when you witness violations of the public trust, management chooses to cover up the violations and earn a greater bonus? Does the management approval rule allow bad managers and bad salespeople to cover up client abuses? Does it come before the code of ethics? I could not imagine this would ever be possible. We have a code of ethics that says every transaction we are involved in will stand the test of complete, open, public scrutiny. So my question still remains: what do you do if you have to report wrongs to the very people whose salary or bonus may be benefiting from the wrongs? What do you do when they prefer to see no evil? This is how I started a new chapter and a new direction in my life, and this is what I learned after I left the industry.
The
public is misled by politicians, by advertisers, by marketers, they're not going to be surprised that they are misled by the investment industry. What they will be surprised is the extent that they're misled by the way it affects their retirement, in most cases planning, and by the fact that nobody is there to back them up and help them when something goes wrong. That, I think, should be the core of the story here.
John Lawrence Reynolds is the author of many books. He writes true stories of investment industry behaviors. Some, such as Free Rider and The Naked Investor, are required reading.
You are out there on your own. You are being essentially brutalized or bullied by an industry that can shape all the rules and regulations according to its own interests over you. That, I think, is the core of the story, and that's what I would want people to recognize and act upon.
You can call yourself whatever you want.
Anything.
A wealth management professional, you can call yourself a professional, an agent, a representative, an advisor. You can use the phrase financial planning. You can say wealth. You can say security. You can use virtually any permutation.
No rules, no.
Well, with the caveat that it cannot misrepresent your licensing, so you can't say you're a securities investor or advisor if you don't have a securities license.
Actually, if you go to the website for your Securities Commission, you'll find that nearly every investment advisor in Canada is misleading their license category. They are licensed in the category of a salesperson. It's like letting me call myself a doctor because I've taken a 3-day first aid course.
I'm not sure I've ever seen anyone have after his name salesperson.
I guess the first thing that people ask me now that I'm out of the business is, how do you find an advisor you can trust? How do you find someone to deal with to look after your money? And that leads me to one of my pet peeves is the industry staffed with professional investment advisors, or are they salespeople? And that was one of the first questions I raised when I got into a few years into the business, and they took away our business cards in 1987 that said stockbroker on them, and they gave us new cards that said investment advisor. The crash of 1987 made the word stocks a dirty word, and so they had to take the word stock out of our business spin, our marketing plan, and they said we were investment advisors. Investment advisors implies a duty of care, a duty of trust, offering a trust to the clients, delivery of trust, that kind of thing, and some of us tried to live up to that, and there are really good investment advisors out there trying to live up to that, but I'm going to maintain that about 80% of them are still in the sales category. And so let's look at whether you're dealing with an advisor or a salesperson. That's your very first clue as to whether you should be trusting that person or whether you should be in a buyer beware relationship. You can't represent yourself falsely. A person cannot mislead their title or what they do. I can't call myself a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer without having the proper qualifications.
It's painting a picture of somebody that is not true. Right. It is deception. The consumer thinks they're dealing with somebody high up in an organization.
Right.
And all they're dealing is a low-life salesperson.
As part of our regulatory regime, once you hold yourself out as an advisor, just based in common law, based in notions of agency and fiduciary duties and such, once you hold yourself out in a certain way, you are required to behave that way.
A broker's suitability obligation, my obligation to sell you investments that are suitable for you, that suitability obligation includes the requirement to minimize your sales commission and not maximize them.
Personal Financial Planners Program, it's called the PFP. We used to use Personal Financial Review, and some of our more less optimistic sales reps used to refer to it as a shopping list. You get all the information, and then you can figure out how you're going to wrap up the client's assets and make yourself your commissions and all the rest of it. And that hasn't changed to this day.
There's far too many people there who think that their broker or their investment advisor is actually capable of managing their money and has their best interests at heart. And while obviously a good number do, the actual overall level of quality is very poor.
They're paid to give advice.
Promising advice.
And it's supposed to be independent, objective advice for their benefit, to help their retirement, not the dispenser of the advisor's retirement.
Weasel language sort of thing. It's not a true technicality. It's certainly not the way we advisors are taught when we do our licensing exams. We are certainly led to believe that we have a duty of care to our advisor, to our clients, and we are led to believe that our fiduciary obligations mean that there's a trust relationship there.
What does a person have to go through the time period before you can become licensed to sell mutual funds in this world, this country?
Days, weeks, months, years? Yeah, I can't even recall. It might be something like 30 days in mutual funds. It's 90 days in securities.
As a member of the public, do you know whether you're dealing with a commission salesperson or a professional advisor?
How would I know? No, I don't.
Okay, how would you know? Good.
Well, if you ask them, you may not get an honest answer, so I don't see that would know.
The public is being deceived by the industry, and the regulators are complicit with that, knowingly or unknowingly.
We are federales, you know, the mountain police.
If you're the police, where are your badges?
Badges? We ain't got no badges. We don't need no badges. I don't have to show you any stinking badges.
In a recent case launched by a client of Thompson Kernaghan, the Ontario Court of Appeal maintained that the Investment Dealers Association does not owe a duty of care and is not accountable to individual investors.
Thirteen provinces and territories have handed their enforcement duties to trade and lobby groups who represent the investment industry. People like the Investment Dealers Association, who've now changed their name to the Investment Regulatory Organization of Canada to try to change their image. The Mutual Fund Dealers Association, the Investment Funds Institute of Canada, the list of professional bodies claiming to protect us goes longer than I can describe. And the result is that no one in Canada is responsible. I learned of Nora Cosgrove and how she took the largest bank investment dealer to court for $10,000. Their defense to her was that they felt they did not owe her a fiduciary duty. I was shocked to hear this. Did this mean that every customer in Canada was in a buyer beware relationship unless they signed all power over to their broker? I met her daughter, a veritable force of nature because of how they treated her mother.
I was told, we are not going to investigate your mother's case. She's 90 years old. She could be dead within the year. You have to realize investigations are expensive and we have to get the best bang for our buck.
This is the kind of answer the public gets from industries who are allowed to police themselves.
My experience with the self-regulators was quite shocking. This is Canada, after all.
My brother came to me in 2004 after he found that his 90-year-old father-in-law had unknowingly signed over his condominium to his investment salesman, with no money changing hands, no appraisal, no interest. And when he went to the securities regulators, they would not even get involved.
They seemed to be, all they wanted to do was divest themselves of any responsibility or potential investigation that negatively reflected on their oversight, their industry, their agents, that kind of thing. They just either wanted to pretend that it hadn't happened or that it wasn't their, it wasn't a valid complaint, that it should go someplace else.
He had to conduct his own investigation, do his own research, and fight to get his father-in-law's property returned to him.
I solved my problem, so, but without their help, for sure.
The investment salesman who took the old man's property from him was fired, moved down 2 floors in the Kelowna office tower, and immediately went back to work in the same business. Let's meet the entire staff of the only investor protection agency in Canada.
People are being misled by the regulators.
His agency is the only one in the country that is not paid by the investment industry. Crown corporations, like your securities commissions, feel that they can delegate their duties down to private trade associations. They think they can trust the most clever, most cunning white-collar businessmen to police themselves on the honor system. We're finding out now that this does not work.
It's exactly like having a fox in charge of the hen houses.
These regulators will only do what they perceive to be a slam dunk. And the slam dunk is the person who has no power or money.
Imagine making a complaint about losing your life's work and being told by people who represent the industry that your complaint is not valid.
Very little attention to the level of prosecutions, and that's the basis upon which so few actually see the light of day. Only 1 in 25 complaints ever end up in an action.
What if only 1 in every 25 calls to 911 resulted in an action being taken?
Effort to conceal things more than an effort to constructively police the industry and or defend the consumer.
If you are an investor victim or an advocate making complaints, such criteria sheet is never publicly disclosed to you. There has been only 1 prosecution in 3 years, and the prosecution that they undertook, which was successful, was a junior employee working in a cage for the HSBC Bank.
So they got 1 guy handling stocks and bond certificates in a back office
of a bank.
Where
the
in 3 years.
The victim was the bank.
U.S. tactics have helped federal prosecutors to rein in fraud by more than 1,000 companies since 2002. Companies like WorldCom and Adelphia Communications. The record of the Integrated Market Enforcement Team after 3 years and 57 million. Vancouver, they have laid 1 charge against 1 man. In Calgary, 0 charges laid. Montreal, 0. And Toronto, they've got 3 cases.
It appears from the outside as an effort to conceal things more than an effort to constructively police the industry and or defend the consumer.
These are SROs without enabling legislation.
SRO refers to self-regulatory agencies, people who police themselves on the honor system.
What the public doesn't understand is that the government has abdicated their responsibility to a body that cannot perform the duties that it's required to do. Thereby, you are unprotected.
More and more, the regulation and the standards and the documents and the paperwork are to look after the industry and the industry member.
It's a pretense that the industry is protected or the consumer is protected when in actual fact you are buyer beware.
They're investigating themselves.
The IDA, in my view, from what I have experienced, is an embarrassment and a disgrace.
I tend to look at the Canadian financial services industry as probably about 20 years behind places like the UK.
No other country in the world does it this way, so it shouldn't be done because we look like the laughingstock of the world.
But we have the most profitable banks in the world. That should tell us something about how monopolized we are by those banks. They are the most powerful organizations in Canada, and they write their own rules. Some say they have a license to print money. It makes me wonder why good people do evil things to others. What could possibly get people to allow financial abuse to be used on fellow Canadians? To allow trusting, vulnerable, and often elderly people to be victimized by the financial industry? How could they look away and play see no evil?
Your retirement depends on keeping your mouth shut. What are you going to do?
We don't want a national regulator because we're getting paid good bucks to do absolutely nothing and pass the buck here as it is now.
The head of the Ontario Securities Commission makes approximately $600,000, and the head commissioner makes over close to $500,000. A head of enforcement at the OSC makes around $150,000.
And paid by the investment industry. One has to wonder why.
If you receive a personal benefit by not executing
Your
the
duties
law,
to the
your
public.
duties to the public, then it's breach of trust.
That's
And
a
one of the
criminal code violation.
Yes, that's in the federal criminal code.
It seems that self-interest and remaining a part of even a bad system is more attractive than being professional. In my province of Alberta, my own Securities Commission had so much unprofessional behavior to hide that they tried to fight having our own Auditor General do an audit of them.
Mr. Speaker, every day the efforts of the Alberta Securities Commission to prevent a proper investigation into its operation grow more desperate. We now have a situation in which the ASC is placing unacceptable conditions on a proposed systems audit by the Auditor General. It is making many people wonder what there is to hide there and is increasing the calls for a public inquiry.
Thank you, Dr. Taft, for being the first person of authority in Canada to have the courage to question such a well-entrenched system of corruption.
How many regulators can you think of in Canada? I can think of probably 13 to 20 some, and I've heard numbers higher when you look at ombudsmen and things. Is that fair?
13 securities regulators, because each of the 10 provinces and 3 territories has their own regulator.
Yeah.
And then we can do the same thing, 13 with the mutual funds. So that's, now we're at 26. And each province has their own set of rules and regs, and each of the silos of financial services has their own rules and regs. So not only do you have to have multiple rules depending on what your licensing is, but those rules will be different as you go from province to province. It's just nuts.
And here is how the Ontario Securities Commission stacks the system with hundreds of paid yes men, all of whom are on the securities police payroll.
There were 14 different committees who were providing advice to the Provincial Securities Commission.
14 committees with multiple people on each committee.
With at least 15 on each. The vast majority of these committees are comprised of investment bankers, not even the research side of the investment banking industry. They would comprise very heavy representation of securities lawyers, and to a limited extent you're going to see portfolio managers from the institutional money management community. I think anybody knows who's ever worked on a committee that if you have 13 people sitting around a room trying to make a decision, the odds are very high it's going to go to the lowest common denominator.
Yesterday, under questioning, the Minister of Finance said, and I quote, "The Commission is confident that the workings of the Commission are in order." Well, what else are they going to say?
An OSC member sits on the IMET board, and
Well, let's go there.
RCMP, Integrated Market Enforcement Team, crack shot detectives, financial detectives.
Oh, really? The OSC have a member
Yes.
on that.
On the IMET teams.
On the IMET teams, and they can only investigate what is brought
What's approved by that committee. So, and so is the IDA, the Investment Dealers Association, and each of the provincial securities commissions have representatives on the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The commissions will say they can't get the job done because they're not police. So they'll start to point the finger at, you know, the RCMP is really in this circle of possible enforcement bodies. So the commissions say, we'd love to do something, but we're not the police.
So if you have only 5 banks doing 90% of the business in Canada, and they have their own private rent-a-cops to police their behavior, do we really have the strongest banks in the world? Or have we created a monopoly monster?
These guys are untouchable. This is the problem.
Yeah. Why aren't the banks touchable? Too powerful? Too strong? Too much legal might? What?
All of the above.
They report to no one, then they decide which rules are which and how to enforce them or whether to ignore them. And so they can interpret the decision as being not a decision if the decision makers decide.
And you don't get into a court unless you have a decision. So basically staff says we've not made any decisions. You go to the commission, they say, what are you doing here? There are no decisions. And so you need a commission decision to go to a court. So commission decisions are capable of being appealed if you get a decision.
Yes.
But in this area of enforcement, there are no decisions. The vast majority of the crimes are not subject to any decisions.
You've gone to the Ontario Securities Commission, which is a statutory body, which is an agency for the purposes of enforcing the Securities Act. However, if you go to their About the OSC website and go to the section that says investors, they will direct you to go to the SROs, not to contact the OSC.
Self-regulators.
The SROs.
Which have no statutory authority and are defined by some as being the club. They're a lobby group in Ottawa, registered as a lobby group?
Yes, they are.
So you're sent to a lobby group like the Greater Toronto Area Automobile Dealers Association to resolve a complaint against an automobile dealer. How are you supposed to get resolution from that if you're...
I got the same question. Who are these SROs? Why are we dealing with them? Why has the government put this corporate entity between us and government? Are you protecting yourselves? They can't protect us. You could, but you refuse to.
The primary regulator of the securities industry, the Investment Dealers Association, broke into 2 different organizations, one to act as the SRO, the self-regulatory organization, and the other to act as a trade organization to promote the interest of the member firms. It's a question of trust, including the perception of trust, and conflict, including the perception of conflict. And the IDA, when it decided to break in half, right up to the end, denied that there was ever any kind of a conflict in its role.
So how do they get away with it? How do they represent themselves as being operating with ethics and integrity when they're industry trade bodies?
How do you get away with it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
This book, The Lucifer Effect, does the best job I have seen to explain how large, intricate systems of behavior become corrupt. It is required reading, in my opinion, for anyone wanting to understand bad systems or to design better ones.
Well, there's 2 ways to protect the reputation of your industry, is to truly deal with your bad apples, which they do from time to time.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the investor victims who have lost their life savings have no restitution for their losses. The other way in which to protect your reputation is to have the public believe there is no crime.
The thing is, right now, the industry seems to have enough loopholes that it doesn't matter what the fact pattern of the case is.
Yes.
The firms and the SROs that represent them will always find some excuse, some way to rationalize why the claim being brought forward is, in their view, spurious, when in fact it might have a great deal of merit.
If you receive an investment loss as a Canadian, that has been caused by malfeasance of your financial advisor. That's something that the securities commissions don't deal with at all.
My question to the government House Leader, how much longer will the government put up with this dysfunctional Securities Commission before some decisive action is taken? Mr. Speaker, this government has known for over a year about serious allegations of wrongdoing at the Alberta Securities Commission. In a January 9, 2004 letter a former ASC enforcement director, told the government what had long been suspected, namely that there is a two-tiered regulatory regime with one set of rules for normal Albertans and another set for insiders and the powerful. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Why has the government, for the past 15 months, been covering up serious allegations of wrongdoing at the Alberta Securities Commission?
I believe it is because the Alberta Securities Commission is a Crown corporation under our Finance Ministry, and our Finance Minister of the day is afraid to admit that she's responsible for such a failing organization. As an insider of such a bad system, she feels that defending her job is more important than doing her job.
What is an exemption?
An exemption is when the commission has the authority to tell someone who applies for an exemption that they do not have to meet the requirements of the Securities Act.
You can go around the law?
You can go around the law.
I understand Terranet's got an exemption to the law applied late one night so that Royal Bank could help float this pig that wasn't floating very well. So what do you do when you can't sell a pig? You try to put lipstick on it, and the lipstick on the pig is to get an exemption to the Securities Act. Hundreds of them every year.
I have to be careful because I don't want to overstate the problem.
Yep.
But there's a very real problem.
And if we've got rules and we want to get around it legally, then we get exemptive relief.
Does the public know about exemptive relief?
The public doesn't know what's going on. If the public knew what was going on in the securities industry, there would be no securities industry.
Well, Mrs. Diane Urquhart, one of the top consulting analysts in Canada, who's also an investor advocate, wrote to the Ontario Securities Commission. I think she wrote to them regarding a late night exemption that was applied for by the Royal Bank and CIBC so that one of the income trusts could dump some of their income trusts into their own Royal Bank and CIBC mutual funds, which is typically illegal, to use your mutual funds to prop up one of your poorly selling investment products. And she wrote a letter to John Stevenson, Secretary to the Ontario Securities Commission, asking him possibly why there's no public notice about these special exemptions to the law. And he said there is no provision in the Act, and the Commission therefore does not have the authority to permit any party other than the applicant to intervene in the Commission's consideration and determination of an application for exemptive relief. Nor do we believe the Commission has any authority to provide reasons for the exercise of its discretionary authority to any person other than the applicant for the relief.
Anytime you talk about exemptive relief, it's for the industry, it's not for the public.
Why do you create securities laws or rules if you're prepared to give exemptions to each and every one of them? It doesn't make sense to me. It's when it suits them.
And the brochure from the MLA's office says the reason for the legislature in the government of Saskatchewan is so that the government agencies are accountable and answerable to the legislature. That's what they're there for. So I go to the member of the legislature who also happens to be the Justice Minister, who's in charge of the Saskatchewan Financial Securities Commission. And I say to him, Frank, they won't answer the question.
So the law's there for a reason. And so I would say it is
it's a fair
appropriate.
question.
It's appropriate for the public to ask why is a valid law that's been placed there for good purposes exempted.
What public interest is an exemption to the law serving when an investment firm goes to the Securities Commission and asks for an exemption to the law? And it could be something as simple as, the dog ate my financial statements, can I be a week late on filing my quarterly report?
Yeah.
And something as serious as, we'd like to not have to follow a commission rebating law, if you don't mind, because we have these proprietary products and we'd like to provide them beneficially to our clients.
It'd be like you having to drive to Quebec City in 4.5 hours.
And I could go get relief around the speeding laws. Say, can I go 180 miles?
So you go 180. How does this help the public? Not a bit, because you're putting the public at risk because of your high-speed driving.
In a society where there are speed limits but no traffic cops, do people follow the speed limit?
How many of them have come to the Securities Commission and said, this is what was done to me, this is what I've lost?
The exemption was done in secret.
Yeah, we're on one side looking at it. He's on the bureaucratic side saying, my pension, my God, my pension. Why does this guy have to come talk to me now?
I hate to be the attacker in this, but you're kind of defending a secret under the table deal.
No, I'm asking a question.
Yeah,
I'm asking if, I mean,
none.
Nobody's complained.
No.
We're not aware of anybody that feels that they have lost any of their money, any of their investments.
I don't think they're even aware of it, Frank.
You know, because the Securities Commission is there to actually not deal with your concerns about the procedure, but to protect people who have actual investments. And I'm wondering what people with actual investments have suffered harm that need protection or need recompense.
So how about all the people that are a member of that firm that got a secret exemption to manipulate their investments?
And so if those products cost more, which they usually do, if that product costs 3.5% and that client switched out of a product that costs 2.5% in order to move into a product that costs 3.5%, the harm is, all else being equal, that client is 1% worse off because that client paid 1% more in fees to the advisor and or his or her firm, all else being equal. But let's just say, to be fair, what if the product performed the same before fees? The difference, the only difference at that point, is that the new product costs 1% more, which means the client now has 1% less. Mr. Justice Minister, you asked for evidence. That's 1% per client on every dollar invested in the entire province of Saskatchewan where this happened.
Okay.
There's a quantification for you. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars across the country, maybe billions.
This is important stuff.
Well, it certainly would be important to people who have actually lost something.
I get the impression you're trying to dodge with that particular statement.
No, I know.
And
I would like to know if anybody, I would be very interested, and I would be very concerned if investors had lost something.
So the question was, how can you show the damage?
For Frank Quinnell, the question was, show me someone's been hurt, Larry. You're wasting my time here. I'm not interested.
Well, the OSC and InvestorEd.ca and Barclays iUnits all have these MER, Management Expense Ratio, calculators on the web.
Okay.
And you can just take the numbers. In the example we used before of 1.6% MER. So all you have to do is over a 40-year time horizon, plug in, here's my portfolio, 1.6%, take the good performance you'd have had with Trimark. Trimark Fund and Templeton are good examples because they're both on the low end of the fees. They're quality funds. They're endorsed by a lot of financial planners I've talked to.
Okay.
And then take any unknown, relatively unknown, high fee, 3.3% plus, wrap account. This could include a lot of products, but
I take the products that this exemption actually applied to, and I hand them to Frank and say, Frank,
and you run a 40-year projection. You're going to find that the 3% one is going to result in a 40 to 50% lower number retirement money for your client than the 1.6% one.
So if you have to pay people more to sell crap, and that payment is embedded in the cost of the product, part of the reason why these products are crappier is because they cost more.
And now that I know that we don't have any suggestion by anybody that they've lost investments because of inappropriate behavior,
you're feeling off the hook.
Off what hook?
you're off the hook of really having to do anything because clients aren't maybe aware that they've lost money. So
No. Clients haven't lost money as far as I know.
Clients have paid higher costs than they needed to be and put in less than competitive investments than they needed to be put into.
Well,
in other words, their interests have been placed behind the interests of an investment firm. Clients have been sold a bill of goods.
And I think there has to be some evidence of that before we can respond to it.
And the Saskatchewan Financial Securities Commission, as the securities regulator in this province, should be able to find that evidence, should they not? They have the power to request documents and look at files.
And if the Saskatchewan Financial Securities or Services Commission believes that there is no such evidence.
Believes that there is no such evidence.
Well, if they do.
So people come to them with allegations and documentation of a secret deal and they still go,
well,
sorry, talk to my lawyer.
Put your documentation in your documentary.
Okay.
And people can make what judgment they want to make.
I just understand how you could claim to be representing the consumer and giving him the best advice.
Right.
And you've swapped out a great product into what appears to be a less established product.
And that was your premise for your article, and something came down on your head that wasn't...
That was basically all I ever said. I didn't write too much after that.
And if you were an enforcement authority in any way, any shape, in any form, you would be looking into this kind of stuff. Instead of making everyday citizens go and do your investigation.
It's my position that the allegations that you refer to have been investigated.
Okay, I have a letter from David Wild that said they did not look into it and they sent it to the Ontario Commission instead.
Show me the letter.
I didn't bring it with me, I hope you understand. And I have a letter from the Ontario Commission that says they didn't look into it either.
Show me that letter too.
And they sent it back to Saskatchewan.
Show me that letter too.
Would you truly?
Show me that letter too.
Would you truly care, or would you give me the same answer that until you can find a client who has been abused, you're not going to look into it?
Show me the letters.
I think it's illegal for a salesman to offer to provide a rebate of a deferred sales charge.
I understand it's illegal too.
And the reason it's illegal is because they don't want to create an opportunity for churning. And churning is when someone does something to have someone change a product that wouldn't otherwise be necessary to change. So if you can reduce deferred sales charge by putting in a rebate, then you're causing someone to churn when who would otherwise not have an interest to do so.
Okay.
And so the law's there for a reason. To not make a disclosure in the public markets and to be exempt from civil liability requirements because some official decides that he'd like to do that for his friend. And secondly, we can't have these exemptions occurring without any kind of public process. There shouldn't be an exemption. If we've decided it's important enough to be in the law is the law. Why do we have to give exemptions to certain parties?
If you get on the website, look up any of the provincial securities commissions, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, BC, there's 13 of them. I've got the Saskatchewan Financial Services Commission website here, and the interesting thing is if you go looking at something called the Securities Division, there's a section here on enforcement, there's another section on exemptions, and that's the one I find interesting. To look up exemptions, there is a heading here that says how to raise capital using exemptions. That one jumped out at me. It looks like it's about a 30-page booklet that advises people to come to Saskatchewan. We will help you break the provincial securities law and raise money in our province without having to follow all of the rules. Now, I might be oversimplifying that a little bit, and I might be a bit skeptical, but here's the brochure, and it is titled How to Raise Capital Using Exemptions. So it's either admitting that the Securities Act is cumbersome and unhelpful, and that they have crafted a booklet to recommend how to get around it, or it is seriously saying, come to Saskatchewan, we take the law less seriously. the previous page, exemption orders out of Saskatchewan alone, over the years 2007, 2006, pick a year and see how many times people have applied and received application approval to go around the law. These are exemption orders in 2007, and the list goes into the dozens, perhaps into the hundreds, and it may be an identical list at all the other securities commissions across the country, because the orders I've seen, they get approved by one commission and they get rubber stamped all the way across the board. No one looks at them. No one's willing to explain afterwards what public interest they served. And if they go wrong, and some of them do go wrong, no one is willing to answer to that. In the recent subprime mortgage crisis, where junk credit from the US and elsewhere was being packaged up and sold as good investments, every securities commission in Canada allowed investment firms to violate our laws to sell this toxic product to the public. Imagine if a government food inspection agency allowed tainted products to enter our food chain, or if our health agencies were to knowingly allow infectious diseases into our healthcare system to earn more profits. What kind of public agency would do such a thing? As a result, our Treasury branches put nearly half their entire customer deposits into these toxic investments and had to be bailed out by you, the taxpayer. My own city of Lethbridge was sold $32 million worth of junk paper, and taxpayers will foot the bill here as well. The University of Calgary put about $18 million in this, and will be another cost to the taxpayer. Finally, everyone in Canada has had to bail out these products, even though our securities commissions knew they did not meet our laws even before they were sold here in Canada. $32 billion oops. Enough money to run the entire province of Alberta for a year. An amount almost as high as the cost of each and every other crime in the entire country, helped by your Provincial Public Securities Commission. That's a pretty large oops to make, and to not answer questions on it. No one will now answer any questions on these granting of exemptions. But the money going to the agencies tells of one possible reason why they would sell out the public interest. I look at this and see negligence. I see breach of trust and breach of duty to protect the public. I imagine the people doing it just see money. I just wish we had a police force in Canada that was concerned with financial crime. From what I have seen, you can almost get away with murder in Canada if you do it in the name of finance. This chapter illustrates the number of frauds that have affected Canadian investors. It brings up the financial cost to Canadians, which I think is greater than all of the crime in all of the country. And it illustrates how badly we fail at prosecuting fraud and financial abuse in Canada. With nearly zero prosecutions, chances of getting away with white-collar crime in Canada are better than any country in the world.
Bank of Canada governor said about the capital markets in Canada that they're equivalent to the wild, wild west.
This is about fraud and financial abuse. Fraud is systemic. It's built into the system. It's usually hidden by cunning, clever financial manipulators, including regulators who look the other way. Perhaps even politicians who look the other way at white-collar crime. Theft is a small-time crime by comparison, by salesmen who get caught and held up as an example to make Canadians think that they are protected. These people build the system to suit themselves, to serve themselves, as we have seen. They're able to steal hundreds of millions and even billions of our money. These are the fish we need to watch. These are the ones who never get caught. They are above the law. Now that we are all greased up and on a slippery slope in Canada, let's look at some of the damages done to Canadians by financial predators. The slippery slope leads to intentionally tainted advice for consumers. It leads to tainted products. Products like Eaton's, which was sold to the public and broke within a year. There are hundreds of ways in which the system is geared to allow financial fraud and financial abuse to be ignored in Canada. These are mostly abuses of trust, abuses of the duty of care that professionals owe to their clients. They're allowed in Canada because they bring in billions of dollars to those who operate the system. These are the crimes of the big hunters, the large predators who design and run the financial system in Canada. The system is made up of hundreds of thousands of people in Canada who operate on the inside, those who feed on the spoils of the investment industry. The little fish are the individual brokers who rip off a few clients. They do almost no damage whatsoever when compared to the big fish, the investment firms, and the self-regulators. Billions upon billions of dollars can be skimmed from Canadians using all of these methods. No one can touch them in Canada, even though they are clearly abusing the public, their clients, or their shareholders. They're simply above the law.
And you try and tell me that there's ethics in this business?
Look at Northern Telecom. Nortel executives used phony accounting to make magic profits appear in the company. They collected huge bonuses. John Roth walked away with $120 million in bonuses. There's a U.S. criminal investigation underway. The company's now bankrupt, but the bonus still went to the executives. CIBC executives tied executive bonuses to deals like Global Crossing and Enron. The deals were worth billions, the bonuses were worth millions, tens of millions, and the deals dissolved like castles in the sand. The executives walked away with tens of millions of dollars. Enron no longer exists. Global Crossing was broke within a year, but they managed to puff up the profits to collect their bonuses.
John Hunkin walked away, and he has lives on the East Coast, and he has walked away with $50 million plus. No criminal charges in the United States, no criminal charges in Canada, no reprimands, no consequences.
Nobody's complained. No, we're not aware of anybody that feels that they have lost any of their money, any of their investments.
I don't think they're even aware of it, Frank.
Okay, thanks for the answer.
The asset-backed commercial paper market collapsed in August 2007, leaving investors holding about $35 billion of frozen notes. The woman shown on this newspaper is Susan Wolberg Jenna, head of the investment dealer self-regulatory agency. Here is her signature on legal exemptions to allow firms to sell toxic investment paper to the public without notice to the public of what they were buying. The signature was done when she was vice chair of the Ontario Securities Commission. In this role, she earned approximately $400,000. It appears rather contradictory that for $400,000, she would allow investments to be sold without meeting our laws. Perhaps she has forgotten her role in approving these while at the Ontario Securities Commission.
Because of the power, their power, and their ability to commit millions of dollars to legal defense, that those who are sold products that are flawed in design, or those advisors who are rogue that cause losses by conducting unethical activities at the front end of the sales process, that there will be limited prospects for seniors and other customers of banks to get organized, to create the funding necessary to fight against a bank. There's a clear imbalance of power.
In China, estimates suggest that government corruption steals 3% of the economy, or $300 billion each year. Nortel alone was a $366 billion hit to shareholders. Does that mean that Canada is worse for corruption? Odds are 3 in 100 that a corrupt official will go to jail in China, making it a high-return, low-risk activity according to the Globe and Mail. When it comes to financial crimes, I and many others conclude that Canada is the world's best place to practice financial crime. In Canada, until the end of 2007, we had only prosecuted one man for financial fraud, while our securities regulators tell us there are 1 million frauds in Canada. 1,000,000 to 1 against getting caught.
There should be consequences for Canadian executives who propagate crimes with international companies that international investors own. That's part of our duty as a country working in an international market.
We have a system in Canada that protects the criminals rather than the victims. We have a system in Canada that's paid for by those very same people. A relatively small number of white-collar tricksters do as much financial damage as each and every other crime in Canada combined. Every property crime, every robbery, every auto theft, mugging, murder, everything, the same damage financially is done by just our clever, powerful white-collar element. This is case study number 1, to demand your provincial MLA or federal MP to conduct an inquiry into. I can't give you all the details in the time allowed here, but I can assure you it is the poster child case in Canada for knowingly abusing clients. Once upon a time, there was a small mutual fund company. This mutual fund company wanted to be a large mutual fund company. They learned that they could make from 9 to 16 times more money by getting their clients to invest in their house brand mutual funds rather than an independent mutual fund. The simple ethical dilemma is this: do you take the easy money and encourage all your trusting clients to buy the house brand because it makes you more, or do you place the investment interests of the client ahead of your own profit? What to do?
It's illegal for a salesman to offer to provide a rebate of a deferred sales charge.
I understand it's illegal too.
And the reason it's illegal is because they don't want to create an opportunity for churning. And churning is when someone does something to have someone change a product that wouldn't otherwise be necessary to change. So if you can reduce the deferred sales charge by permitting a rebate, then you're causing someone to churn when he would otherwise not have an interest to do so.
Okay.
And so the law's there for a reason.
They applied for permission to violate the laws against commission rebating. This permission was granted by all provincial securities commissions, although not one will now say what if any public interest was served by letting this firm break our laws. The most ethical managers protested this apparent abuse of client interests, and they were disposed of.
So it all comes down to don't rock the boat. Instead of don't break the law, it comes down to don't rock the boat.
Yes.
Even if
that is the impression that I received.
A long-term employee went to the authorities to complain about a shopping list of client abusive practices. He was greeted with less than open arms. He was not helped at all. Instead, he was made a victim. His employer turned on him with legal bloodhounds, making him into a criminal. They invaded his home with a private, secretly obtained search warrant called an Anton Pillar Order. It gave them power to search and seize any evidence this man had to prove his allegations.
And do we have clients of the firm who say they've lost money complain to the Securities Commission? I'm not aware that we do.
Okay, so that's a good reason to let malfeasance and
Well,
client misdirection, misinformation go unreported because you're saying nobody has noticed it yet?
The Anton Pillar Order even prevented the employee from speaking with the police or any other authority.
Where is any evidence of that investigation? Why is it that you did acquire that information held under the Anton Pillar Order when you know and you were quite capable of getting that information, but you've refused to? Why?
Yeah.
Why did you abdicate it to Ontario? Well, you're saying that the head office for is in Ontario. It is now, since the takeover. But at the relevant time of this, the head office was in Manitoba. Why hasn't Manitoba investigated this?
Without justice, without hope. The employee took his own life after being so thoroughly abandoned. At this point, the employer was scot-free. No investigation took place into the allegations.
If they wash their hands often enough, you would think their hands would be clean. Is that the impression you get?
Well, whose hands are his blood on?
Securities Commission,
Yes.
I think, for failing to
follow through.
Follow through.
Yeah.
Back then, investment firms were selling for 6 to 14 times cash flow. This firm had learned that selling house brand funds would increase cash flow by 9 to 16 times. With this increase in profit, the firm was able to represent itself as a profit leader and sold itself off to a major firm for over $800 million. The owners and the salespeople all shared in the spoils. I wonder whose interests they represented when they sold their mutual funds.
The head of compliance.
Heard that name.
Then, he left just prior to the sale. This same fellow is currently the vice president of enforcement of the Mutual Fund Dealers Association.
So he's gone from being an industry participant to an industry cop, industry regulator, self-regulator, something? What's the analogy there? What's the...
Well, it's like it's putting the fox in charge of the hen house as far as I'm concerned.
Earning secret commissions is an offense under the Criminal Code in Canada. The Attorney General desperately tries to protect his job and protect the reputation of the Securities Commission that he's responsible for. I wonder why he doesn't protect the public.
Well, I know that we're following up on the allegations made in that matter, and I'm aware of that. So now I know what we're talking about. We're not talking about anything new in respect to any clients of any firm who are alleging that they have lost anything.
This province sent all the material to another province, another provincial securities commission, and the other commission sent it all back. No investigation. We later learn from the provincial auditor that this securities commission did not have the capability to conduct enforcement investigations.
Yes, I goaded, I called the OSC, the Ontario Securities Commission. I tried to goad them, I tried to embarrass them, and all they did was hunker down and ignore it. And that's exactly what I said in many of my writings would happen.
A young, promising investment industry employee is dead after being hounded to his death by legal sharks, without a single allegation being investigated.
I was not allowed to present the truth in court.
And you're punished for telling the truth.
One man spends 10 days in jail in Calgary for trying to explain the crimes involved in this case.
They don't want this out in the open because then a smart lawyer is going to say, hey, the Ontario government, the lead regulator, and all you other provincial securities commissions, you're liable for part of these losses too because you gave them the bullets to do it.
Of some 10,000 pages of evidence this man brings to a Calgary courtroom, the court only allows one document to be entered into court.
He said it had nothing in it of any significance. Nothing.
And yet he sent you to jail
for 10 days
for not providing
the name of the person,
the name of how you got it.
Right.
The court accepted his check for $5,000 as a fine for his efforts to tell of this scandal. He's called an unwelcome interloper in Calgary court. This is what happens in Canada when an innocent man stands up to an $800 million crime, when he could not stand by after a friend killed himself over it, when a rich enough person wants it hidden.
He was bullied to death. And collective manslaughter, homicide. I mean, when people don't do their jobs and somebody ends up taking their own life and they're driven to it, that's bullying. I've used the term collective homicide.
I think I've found one of Canada's most predatory investment salesperson. I certainly found the most predatory investment firm. I found the poster child of predatory behavior against Canadians. One man has spent approximately $1 million to cover this up.
And what this method is doing in the case of, he's slap-suiting everybody who gets anywhere close to it, such that even the regulators are intimidated by what the consequences are going to be on them. They don't want to be in something controversial that's going to be contested.
$800 million has been gained by abusing clients. There's been an assist by securities regulators with this goal. No charges, no investigation. Second assist goes to a legal system in Canada which serves and protects those willing to spend $1 million in legal fees.
I've done my best to bring a lot of this to the public's attention.
Your writing is good.
At every turn, it's like being covered with a wet blanket. Silence.
At extreme goading by makers of this film and others, the RCMP reluctantly sends in a rookie investigator with no financial experience. He closes the file without interview of even half those involved.
Seems like some people, if they have enough money, are able to basically shut down websites, discussion forums, perhaps documentaries,
free discussion,
newspaper commentary, online blog discussion.
Really?
And it's sort of interesting if somebody has the power to shut down, let's say, 10 critics using whatever media.
Yeah.
Why are they spending such money and energy to shut down this free comment in a democracy if they have nothing to hide?
Hurt people. People who've been abused, abuse other people. The unique violence of white-collar crime is that the victims have no recourse, no justice. All they can do is go home and be angry at themselves, at their lives, at their families.
What often typifies the sociopath is the low subcortical arousal, so that they need constant stimulation. The fact that they tend to be very charismatic and egocentric. The fact that they don't seem to have the capacity to generate genuine empathy and truly experience what another person is feeling or going through.
It was very hard on my children. It was, you don't sleep for weeks, months.
I've seen it in victims of white-collar crime. I've seen it in those who tell the truth about white-collar crime. I've felt the helplessness and the hopelessness myself.
More and more, the world of work tends to be about social isolation, about that competitiveness, about me against you. So we're not necessarily having the social connections. We're not necessarily doing work that most of us, if we were to step outside objectively, could say, boy, I felt like I really made a significant contribution today to the well-being of my culture.
For me, this turned out to be a journey into institutionalized abuse, a journey into illness, a crash course in sickness, into the madness caused by men who build institutions, who hide behind them, who hurt others.
You get a lot of companies that are cheating out there, but it's not costing people their lives. And the problem with the investment industry, it has an impact on people's lives.
Institutionalized abuse, bullying, and crime rarely can be stopped. It's too large.
It is one of the most insidious crimes that you can commit, because the perpetrator can rationalize, ignore, and suffer gracefully because he or she has the money.
It is abuse by governments, corporations, bureaucracies.
Took it to the national director of a major brokerage, and I said, here, look at this. And he read through it, and a little smile curled across his face. He said, oh, this is nothing new. We do this all the time.
My personal message is this: fight abuse. Take a stand. Do not allow it. Otherwise, no one may take a stand for you when it's your turn. I ask the question, do sick people make others sick? Is pathological greed an illness? Perhaps an addiction?
What it can mean is that they're going to seek out professions where they can get that kind of constant stimulation, and where if they choose to be charismatic they can rise to the top, and where not being able to be empathic to the concerns or feelings of others, again back to your questions around the culture of work, in some respects that's rewarded.
If workaholism is an addiction, and addiction is an illness, are those at the top sometimes the sickest? Perhaps white-collar fraudsters are sick people who make other people sick. But what happens to the prey in a predatory system?
What did it cost me? Broke off a piece of one's soul, which is essentially irretrievable, and it will haunt you until your last breath.
Eckhart Tolle says identification with things creates attachment to things, obsession with things, which in turn creates our consumer society, where the only measure of progress is more. The unchecked striving for more, for endless growth, is a dysfunction and a disease. It is an addictive need, not an authentic one.
We can talk all we want about altruism and humanity and appreciating our fellow man and that we're kind and giving. Actions speak louder than words.
What if criminal laws such as forgery, fraud, negligence, and misrepresentation could be enforced in Canada against the large financial players and against regulators? What if these industries were not too big to prosecute? What if Canada had a police agency that was able to treat financial crimes like any other crimes, to prosecute them even? What if Canadians were informed whether their financial person was a true professional with a university level of competence, or a salesman with a 3-month correspondence course? What if they had to display an actual license on the wall? What if instead of allowing the several 100,000 persons who feed off the investment industry to tell us how noble they are, what if we had just one consumer protection agency working for us that was not bought and paid for by the investment industry? What if Canada had a system of consumer protection where intentionally tainted or misrepresented investments could not be sold to an unsuspecting public? What if Canada protected and valued whistleblowers, those people who risk everything they have to tell the truth and warn the public of tainted or dangerous goods or predatory services? What if abused and victimized investment clients could take their complaints to criminal authorities instead of being herded like cattle into the industry-designed and industry-refereed kangaroo courts? What if the Canadian investing public were informed of whether they were in a trusting professional financial advisory relationship or in a predatory buyer beware relationship where it's every man for himself? What if investment professionals were required to put your investment plan, your risks, your costs, and their conflicts of interest in writing so that you are informed? Some of the pros I used to work with already do this. Imagine if every financial professional had to do it to be considered a professional. What if investment firms in Canada were forced to refund money on investments which were knowingly tainted or knowingly misrepresented, like Walmart or other decent retailers do each and every day? What if in Canada we did not have to prove intent to defraud? What if we just had to prove the fraud, like they do in the United States? Can you imagine a hockey game where we could not call a penalty unless we could prove that a player truly intended to hurt the other player? Why has our legal system put this impossible barrier between us and justice? What if the justice system in Canada could bring a con artist to jail in 6 months like the US did recently with Bernie Madoff? Is our legal system so third world that it takes us 11 years to jail Garth Drabinsky or anyone? Do we have a warped and self-serving legal system? Come on guys, clean up your act and clean up your profession, or please just do us all a favor and stop calling yourselves a profession. Some people stopped a long time ago. What if Canadian politicians actually protected us from predatory financial behavior instead of wooing the predators for contributions and selling themselves to be on their future boards of directors? With over 130,000 registered investment salespersons in Canada calling themselves every name in the world except the name salesperson, what if the Competition Bureau of Canada actually read their own law against misrepresentation and took steps to enforce it? What if consumers were actually notified if tainted products needed to skirt our laws in order to be sold in Canada? I imagine that if many of these things were to happen, a lot of very rich Canadian investment dealers would be quite upset. I know they were upset when I asked just a few of these questions when I worked with them. They said things to me like, "Larry, you're not a team player," and "Larry, you need to play ball with us." I now know that these are terms that mean, "Larry, you need to keep your mouth closed and help us to screw the public. It's how we get rich the quick way." They just did not have the courage to say it out loud. I, on the other hand, thought that my job was not to get rich quick, but to serve my clients as best I could. I was wrong. That is not the intent of the investment industry in Canada today. The industry will be predatory and never professional until we force upon them a system of best practices. I will end this little film journey here by thanking you for taking the time to check it out. I hope you will go to breachoftrust.ca and investoradvocates.ca and use the information there to call your MLA, let him or her know that a public inquiry is needed into just 2 out of the thousands of legal and financial tricks that are played on the public each and every day. I end with a short list of public and authority figures who have been long aware of the crimes against the public done by this financial industry. For some reason they have looked the other way. They have found it easier to ignore financial raping of the public than to do their jobs and stand up to billion-dollar corporations. You'll have to ask them why. It's now in your hands, you, the audience. I've done what I can to make the public aware of the problem as I see it. Now it's up to you. You can leave this theater and talk among your friends of what you have seen here, or you can stand up and use your voice for change. Without your voice, your demand, your letter, nothing will happen, and Canada will remain the best country in the world for white-collar crooks to work their trade.
Everything